Thank you, Professor Sachs. It's a pleasure to see you through this way, and thank you for your words. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First, I would like to thank Columbia University and the Earth Institute in particular for inviting me to join you all today. It's a great honor for me to participate in the State of the Planet conference, which will discuss the most important challenges humanity faces today. It is also an opportunity to talk about ongoing global climate change talks, especially, as you were saying, Professor Sachs, Mexico is proud to be hosting the next meeting, the COP16, in our country. Let me start by saying that I'm aware this is urgent, that we need to act now as countries and as governments, and I know it will not be easy for so many different nations to find common ground in this issue. But we will ensure that every voice will be heard and no one are left out as we seek to build the trust needed to reach a workable agreement with measurable emissions reduction targets. I also know that all of us listening today will have to contribute. Wherever you work, in media, in government, in science, in civil society organizations, your work is very, very important. Most serious studies agree that if we do not act soon, the economic, social, and environmental impact will be devastating, and mainly for developing countries. And this is true especially true in this case, in the developing countries, because those countries are the weakest part of the chain, are the weakest places for hurricanes, floods, or lack of water. So we are already seeing in many parts of the world these phenomena. In the case of Mexico, we are suffering already the impact of climate change in the life of 1,000 people here. However, I think that every challenge is an opportunity, and that is the case in climate change. Today, humanity has the opportunity to change our development model. So probably the key in order to find a common ground, in order to find an agreement, is to find out a new model of development. A new model that allows us to grow in harmony with the environment, which will imply a new industrial revolution based on low carbon growth. From my point of view, a key issue is how to connect, how to link fighting poverty, which is a main concern in developing countries, with fighting climate change. And probably the most important part of that is to find out the financial and economic mechanism in order to link actions coming from the government and industries to fight climate change, and at the same time that those actions could fight poverty in several countries. One of those mechanisms, for instance, is to establish environmental services program. But I will talk about that later. Let us discard the idea that changing to a new way of consuming and producing means more poverty necessarily. We can have prosperity this way, fighting climate change too, and a prosperity that will last a lot longer. That's the key of the issue. Today, Mexico is betting on humanity's ability to change. And we have set targets for reduction of emissions, starting with an annual 50 million carbon tons by 2012. We are starting with several programs. We have a green agenda and we have a great agenda. In the case of the first one, for instance, we are working a lot in terms of actions to have reforestation programs in the country. In that sense, we are in the green agenda of my country, we are paying to the poorest people in the country, indigenous communities, for instance, in order to get a commitment from them for preserving the rainforests or preserving the woods where they used to live. In that sense, the Green Agenda in Mexico implies a lot of mechanism in a very aggressive program for reforestation of the country. Actually, today, we are reforestating or planting more trees or more hectares of trees than all those hectares that we used to lose in the country due agricultural practices or firewoods and others. So, in the case of the Green Agenda, we are working and moving ahead. And the key of the Green Agenda is precisely the environmental services payments. In that sense, we are paying to the people real income in order to preserve the woods and rainforests. And probably this program could be one of the most important alternatives for the countries in order to start to work today in fighting climate change. So all the issues related with the so-called RED, reduction of emissions coming from deforestation, will be key for COP16, and it was probably one of the most important parts that we agreed last year in Copenhagen. We also have a great agenda in order to use energy in a more efficient way, and in order to generate it through renewable sources. For instance, my government has established programs in order to reach a goal for the year 2012, in the sense that we are trying to establish at least 26% of our total electricity production coming from renewable sources. At the same time, we are establishing some incentives for industries and even for consumers in order to promote better use of electricity and energy at home. For instance, we have a very important program in order to replace home appliances like refrigerators or air conditioning equipment for a new one, saving energy. We are subsidizing to the poorest families, or we are providing very affordable credits for middle-class families. And in that sense, we have a very powerful stimulus in order to save energy at home. At the same time, we are trying to produce more wind energy. Actually, today we are the largest country producing wind energy in Latin America. I inaugurated in my first year in the office the first facility, the first wind farm in Mexico. And today we have plans in order to reach more than 3,000 megawatts in terms of wind energy in the country. At the same time, we have several programs in order to use any alternative source of energy in the country. So the point is, with this national agenda against climate change, we want to do more, and we want to be part of the solution, despite the fact that we are a developing country with a lot of people living still in poverty. But to move forward faster, we, as a developing country, we will need financial and technological help coming from the world. So, how are we going to get a deal, and a deal very soon, in terms of climate change? Let me share the 7 principles, the 7 steps that I believe we need to take to reach an agreement. And we need to be very concerned about how to reach each one of these principles. One is all countries must act under the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities according to their capabilities. Today, developing countries account for more than half of global carbon emissions. And this means that even if developed countries drastically reduce their emissions, we will not solve the problem of climate change. Therefore, We must all contribute to the best of our ability. And the way to contribute is to applying resources according with the capabilities of each country. We need to change this paradigm in the sense that climate change is only a question or only a responsibility of developed countries. I don't agree with that, and we need to establish a new consciousness about the problem and promote the participation of more developing countries in the commitments against climate change. So the key is to understand what could be the fair rule in order to apply in concrete terms, in money, in programs, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Second, developed nations must assume the leadership and give the example that their historical responsibility demands. The world's largest economies have developed using carbon-intensive industries, and most of the accumulated carbon in the atmosphere comes from them. Also, they have the resources, they have the technology to tackle the problem. 3, we need to understand that the cost of doing nothing will be higher than the cost of taking action now. The Stern report clearly shows that doing nothing today will cost a lot more in the future for any country. In Mexico, we know that. Today, we need to pay a lot in order to adapt to a new forms of food production, but we need to adapt even today in order to prevent floods, in order to prevent droughts in the country. We need to deliver drinking water and other necessary measures at a more expensive cost for the government. And all of that is a consequence of the climate change affecting our country. For instance, we are spending thousands of millions of dollars in all the southern of the country in order to prevent floods. For instance, the floods that we had in Tabasco in 2007, when the water covered 70% of the total territory of that state in Mexico. 4, the cost of fighting climate change do not mean less economic growth. Instead, this is an opportunity to change to a sustainable human development model. This is the key. This is a particular concern for developing countries. It is also a unique opportunity to take a development path that generates growth and prosperity while caring for the environment. To achieve this, we need to change the way we produce and consume. We must embrace the new economic paradigm of a low-carbon growth path. This is today the only sustainable model. I am further convinced that the first countries to change will gain considerable competitive advantages in the clean industry that will power the economies tomorrow. 5, developing nations face the difficult challenges of mitigating climate change, adapting to it, and at the same time trying to lift our people out of poverty. Therefore, we need the support of developed countries to assume our responsibilities. So we need to create tools such as technology transfer and financial instruments to enable developing countries to cooperate. One of the main commitments reached in Copenhagen was to set up an international fund to support mitigation and adaptation measures. The Green Fund, which Mexico has been strongly promoting during several years, will channel resources to those countries willing to take concrete actions. As the promoters of the fund, we are pleased it has received so much support. Now we need to design mechanisms in order to link the goal of developing nation governments, fighting poverty, with the goal of the international community, fighting climate change. And the way to do that is to find out the mechanism to provide real income to the poorest people, and at the same time that the action of those members of the community living in poverty could be linked with the task of tackle climate change, reducing emissions, preventing deforestation, reforestation, other areas, etc. 6, we must support poorer countries to adapt to climate change, and the sooner the better in this matter, or this aid will be useless in the long term. Mexico, as I was saying, is already showing what a developing country can do. We have begun an ambitious emissions reduction program. I already mentioned we will reduce our annual carbon emissions by 50 million tons by 2012. Let me tell you that by 2020, we are aiming for a 30% reductions provided we get sufficient financial and technology help coming from the world. And 7, the road to a global agreement must be based on trust, respect, and above all, the active participation of all countries. To achieve this, developed nations must show leadership in mitigation and financing, and developing nations must strengthen our will to act through concrete and verifiable measures that we put in place. Dear friends, more than 100 countries have signed the Copenhagen Accord, and many of them have already reported their mitigation commitments and actions. This shows that there is a strong interest in achieving solid progress at COP16 in Mexico. But we will need all of you listening and watching us today to help us. It will take the efforts of anyone to advance towards the decisions we need to save the planet. Mexico is committed to showing leadership in the negotiation process by including all the voices and concerns of the world. In this spirit, I believe we can reach the agreement the world needs to fight climate change. Thank you very much for your invitation.
Thoughtful, balanced, and for all of those reasons, very powerful approach. The idea that you have that all countries need to participate is really key, and as we've seen with your proposal on the Mexican Green Climate Fund, the Mexico proposal, it was that idea of responsibility that extends of both developed and developing countries that has been so powerful in getting that idea spreading throughout the world. And I want to say to the people here that Mexico's innovative leadership that we just heard on the green agenda, paying for ecological services, targets for renewables, is also on the social side. Many of you have probably heard about the Oportunidades program of Mexico that President Calderón has been leading. That program has been adopted with its remarkable success by New York City, the conditional cash transfer idea. So, Mr. President, the first thing I want to say is that I hope that your ideas, which you just laid out, will not only reach us here, but will reach Washington. We need the same agenda, and I want to applaud you for being so innovative in that agenda. I wonder if I could keep you for one moment and ask you a question specifically about the financing. You've put forward what I think is a very powerful idea of a global climate fund. It did get a lot of positive play in the G20 last year. How do you see the prospect of that rolling out this year? Do you think that we can help you to, in public opinion and in scientific opinion, to help you put that wonderful idea over the top?
Well, in terms of the Green Fund, probably we have already, Professor Sachs, we have already the most important part, which is the money. Several developed countries have committed to provide funds, to provide actually enough, but my point is what we need today urgently is the instrument, the way, the programs in which we can transfer these commitments or economic commitments from developed countries to clear and very pragmatical actions in developing countries. So what we need is to design exactly what are we going to do with that money. So in the moment that the countries have a clear idea about what kind of activities could be supported by Green Fund, I think that there will be a positive circle in the sense that more action will come from developing countries. For instance, if we can design an environmental services program at global level, in the sense that we can measure the deforestation process in each developing country and establish some kind of commitment in terms of prevent or reduce the annual rate of deforestation in a very particular country or in a very particular part of its territory. And at the same time, we can link determine amount of money with the reductions, real reductions of the rate of deforestation, we will get a positive outcome and a clear example that what can we do. Talking about the same in reforestation, if we can link, I don't know, one amount of money with a number of hectares reforested in developing countries, we can establish the economic incentives that we need in order to provide actions in developing countries. Probably the key of the use of the Green Fund will be to establish some kind of measure, some kind of economic link between the number of tons that you can reduce or avoid through your actions with the number of dollars or euros that you can get access through your actions. For instance, if I can reduce 1 ton of carbon emissions, I could be sure that I can get from the Green Fund, I don't know, $20 or $15, whatever. But the point is, if we establish some kind of price in terms of the action in developing countries, we can start to use that money, and we can start to take action, which is the key today. So from now to November in Mexico, we need to design those mechanisms. And depending on how effective and how clear could be those mechanisms, will be the success that we can have specifically in the financial aspect of the problem. And I'm sure, Professor Sack, that if we can find out the financial mechanism to start to fix the problem, we can start a very important ground in order to reach a global agreement on climate change. So, about the expectations, it will be very difficult to reach an agreement. We need to be serious on that. I think that the mechanism don't help a lot in that sense. The consensus mechanism is very complex to follow and reach, because we are translating the consensus mechanism in some kind of veto right coming from some parts, and that was not exactly the intention of United Nations at the moment to establish the consensus mechanism. However, today we are working with several countries. We are working with the leaders of the groups inside United Nations, inside the conference of the parts, and we are moving ahead. That's that I can say. I don't want to say that COP16 will be a full success. I want to do that. I am working to have it, but probably it's very soon to say that. But we are working really hard on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you've given us a homework assignment here. One of the things that we're doing, Mr. President, especially after meeting with your team, is that the Earth Institute is helping to organize a global consortium of research centers, both on the mitigation and on the adaptation side. And we will take your message and instruction to heart about designing mechanisms in the next few months to give support precisely to these negotiations. And let me say that your idea of linking the financing and results is very powerful. We also know from experience we really need rules to make sure that the promised money from the wealthy countries actually gets delivered, and that is one of the powerful aspects of your proposal, that there's an actual allocation, an assessment based on emissions as well as on other standards. So I hope that both pieces can be put in place, but please do know that we're going to be working round the clock to give support to exactly the request that you just made about thinking on the specific mechanisms and working together with your team in that regard. Let me say your message has been heard very clear on all points. We have the 7-point agenda. We have the innovations of the Mexico program. We have the work instructions. This has been, as I knew it would be, absolutely extraordinary to listen to you. We wish you all the best in your leadership. We know what a difference it makes for the world. And thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, everyone. And I hope to see you in Mexico.
Great.